It is difficult to improve on perfection even after 43 years. That is why I decided to film Dr. B.W. Wells' a memorable 1932 book on the vegetation of North Carolina. I'm Dr. Hollis Rogers of the Biology Department, University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Since his retirement from the Biology Department at NC State University, Dr. and Mrs. Wells have lived on their farm near Wake Forest. Mr. Lionel Melvin, a longtime friend of Dr. Wells and a field botanist, and I had an opportunity to visit Dr. Wells in his studio at home. And this morning now, we're sitting here very comfortably in your studio that I understand that you constructed yourself some 20 years ago after you had retired from your academic career at NC State, and it seems that you've been using these some 20 years very profitably from the appearances here.
It certainly has been a great, best possible thing that can happen to me as a botanist. It not only enlarges my knowledge of the plants of the area, but nobody can collect plants and work in the open and not enjoy excellent health. So, so that now that I am 8 months past 90 years of age, I am still able to keep up with the times, and particularly I'm so delighted to be here and be introduced to the general public because of the types of botany are not so frequent as they should be. Namely, that they should deal with the variety of conditions which make possible different varieties of plants. That, you see, goes without saying.
Mr. Melvin, you chat with him a little about when he was writing the book, will you?
When did you begin this, Dr. Wells? Did you begin before it was published, the writing of it? I'm sure you'd had to, but how long before you published your book, The Natural Garden?
Oh, yes. Of course, I might say that all my previous hours spent out of doors in relation to the remarkable vegetation of North Carolina, I was able, but I think what you want to know is when did I start writing the book?
Yes,
Well, that was a full year, maybe about a year and a half that I began, because I wanted to have time to check everything that I was writing about and recheck it by some travel into the various parts of the state and see again the remarkable wild vegetation of North Carolina, which is unquestionably the finest state in the eastern United States to get the maximum variety of plants in one state.
But you did have your material together at that time when you first started writing, is that right? Your
Oh, yes. Yeah, oh, yes.
And that was about 1931? 32.
The book was published.
The book was published in 32,
in 1932.
Yes. Well, what particular changes in the resources of North Carolina have you observed now, Dr. Wells, in the last 45 years since you gathered the material to write Natural Gardens? What are your opinions of what we're doing to North Carolina?
Oh, I would say that the greatest changes have been, of course, the changes involved in the rural people giving up they're small farms and and going into the cities. And when I first came out here 20 years ago, there were far more people coming from Raleigh and surrounding towns to visit Zeal's Rock, which happens to be a very, very interesting, massive rock wall that is on this place. But that has changed. There are fewer and fewer people come, particularly adult people. It takes the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts have both been out here. It seems that to get people out here into this beautiful environment that I've enjoyed all these years, it seems like the adult people are still so involved in their city interest, and everything going on is so complex in the cities that they seldom come out here. And so that's a reality that everybody should know about, and not make themselves pin themselves down to just the city. It's so important to have a chance to see the rural district, and this farm of 150 acres with this remarkable rock wall on one side of it is well worth the knowledge and the place for visiting the cities.
I believe you have a painting here in the studio of that rock formation, don't you?
Oh, yes.
So we will be able to show that painting.
Yes, that's right.
To go along with our work here now.
Let me be frank and tell you, if I hadn't had an interest in painting, which keeps me out here in this very healthy environment, I would have been out of luck. But I have painted over 500 pictures since I've been out here.
In the 20 years since your retirement?
In the 20 years. I have a list of them.
Well, I was present at the art show that they put on for you for your 90th birthday, and you had, how many of the paintings did you have on exhibit at the studio?
I had 75 paintings.
75 paintings.
And that was a very surprising event for me, that so many people came to look at my pictures, and because I always think of myself as an amateur artist, and it encouraged me to keep going.
Well, it was interesting to me, the fact that you had given your paintings away until it was quite a job to get them together for the exhibit, because you paint them and give them away, I understand.
Oh, yes. I never sell a painting at all, and the like.
What has been your painting schedule? How much time do you spend per day in your studio painting? What's been your personal schedule?
Let me assure you, it all depends on how much interested you are. A number of times, my wife will go to the city on Saturday, and I'll be alone on the other. People up the road, I'd be the only human being a mile in every direction. Mm-hmm. It's an unusual situation.
Yeah, you are at the sign says dead end road, and you go a little beyond that to get to your house.
And when you get into that, then you're prevented from going anywhere else because of the river. Goes on a great loop around you.
And this studio, now you built yourself with your own hands, the fireplace, your chimney, you installed your skylighting and everything for painting.
The two carpenters built the building itself,
and
naturally. But the internal things here, particularly the fireplace, I was able to build it for the fact that scattered over this country, when the first white men came into this country, what did they find but what is now a problem to understand? That is that boulders, good-sized boulders, were scattered all over the land here. Not thick, but scattered. And but there were so many in this whole area that it has given a name to the church up the road here.
And at the relative young age of 70, you gathered those boulders and built your chimneys, your rock walls, and kept yourself busy around here.
I had a man who lived in the other house. There were only 2 houses on this place, and he and his boy came down and mixed the mortar and brought the cement, the plaster in and so forth. And I laid every stone in my chimney. And it was simply because I read books about chimneys and so on, so that it was a great delight to build my own chimney.
In other words, in those days, you didn't have to get out and jog around the block to get exercise, is this?
No, indeed.
Yeah, as I look around your place and see the rock wall you've built and the chimney you've built, I think it tends to show why you are so physically capable here at the age that you exposed a while ago of 90. I think people would question me if I said so as they're looking at you.
I can't help but think that could be the major factor in keeping me relatively young.
Yes, sir. What is the age of the house you live in? When was it constructed?
Oh, I have been told that the house, there was a cabin that preceded the house I'm living in, and it was burned up, destroyed, and then this house was built. I think it was 1905. It's on. I think that's when it was built.
I'll verify that. I saw it this morning.
Yeah. And but I, of course, have improved it with porches and the like. And of course, when I first came, the grounds were all grown up in weeds and bushes and everything.
And it had been abandoned.
Absolutely, and but it offered a wonderful chance for work, healthy work. I was young enough at 70 to clearly get the whole place in order. Yes.
I am pleased every time I run the movie that you speak about in the 1920s speeding across the state in the fast automobiles. And of course, that was written in the 30s, and automobiles have gotten a lot faster since then, Dr. Wells.
Yes. I didn't, I don't think I implied by speeding. I bought my first automobile in about 1920. Came in and used it so I could get to the coast, different parts of the coastal plain as well as the mountains. The thing to keep in mind is what I found myself. I feel well enough and enjoying it, but I just must not try to do very hard work. And if I don't do that, I'm going to go right on living.
I do the same thing that you say. Whenever I feel I'm reaching the place where I'm going to get tired, I stop right then and rest. And of course, I am still teaching, and I have had a group of students for 3 days on Roan Mountain, camped right on the very grounds where the old Cloudland Hotel
Oh, yeah, I've been there twice, two or three times.
I have found that there now is the ideal place because I have as many as 50, 70 students to go with me. So we go up there now and camp. There's good roads. We go up there and camp and live there in the Canadian Zone Forest. We live in Christmas tree land.
They're lucky
And do you know who we talk about all the time when we're up there? Dr. Wells. Every one of them has read your book, and they know what we mean.
Oh, yes.
Well, let's drop back now to where you grew up and your undergraduate, and just take your education through for a while.
I was born in Troy, Ohio, in 1884, March 5th. And I had the experience of many children that are born in the hands of preachers. Looking back, I think it was rather desirable because I had acquaintances with so many different people. When we moved every 2 years, that it had a certain value, no question about it, in the change of environment and new people to get acquainted with and so on.
Where did you do your bachelor's?
At Ohio State University.
At Ohio State, okay.
That's right. And I also went back in I think it was about 1916. I went back and got my master's degree also there. And after that year, I then I did a wise thing. I borrowed the money and was accepted at the University of Chicago in relation of some advanced work and research that I had made, and they were very, very unusual, naturally, but at the University of Chicago was in 1917, and I had the PhD degree awarded to me at the June exercises. Things were not very satisfactory in the country, and it was difficult to get jobs as teachers. But I went down south and taught 2 years in 2 southern universities, and then came here. Without realizing it, I happened to come to North Carolina, and after spending 21 years in North Carolina in the field of ecology, I don't hesitate to state to anyone that it is the most interesting state for varieties of ecology and the knowledge that you must have if you to interpret what you find and see in this North Carolina.
The Natural Gardens of North Carolina film, which will be following in a few minutes, has been an attempt to record the vegetation of North Carolina as it was described by Dr. Wells in his book of the same title, written more than 43 years ago. This has been quite a difficult task because development, the destruction of areas has destroyed any number of these prime ecological areas in the state. So our attempt to record them has led the camera crew, myself principally, through some 10 or 11 of North Carolina's state parks, 2 national parks, the Blue Ridge Parkway, and quite a bit of the area in the National Forest. To begin the book, we start with Dr. Wells on the seaside community, and here, remember, the narration that you will get on the film is strictly the words from Dr. Wells' book. Now, Dr. Wells' first chapter, the seaside community, starts with the sand on the ocean side, the sand moved by the wind in the sand dunes where vegetation does not grow until it is stabilized by the dune grass, to be followed by the maritime forest. And then on the backside of this, we will come up with the salt marshes to complete Dr. Wells' first chapter on the seaside community. Then inland and along the outer banks where there are freshwater ponds, relatively shallow, there will be vegetation like the cattail marshes, sedge marshes, and various other areas that Dr. Wells lists as being a unique place for the searching for wildflowers if one is properly equipped to do so. Then we will move on into the dramatic wet gardens or the swamp forest that are principally dominated here by the cypress and gums, and it requires a boat to get in to photograph or to enjoy these areas. Open areas of deeper water he calls the fish gardens. These are chapters in the book, and the fish gardens are represented by open clear water or by the plants that come up from the bottom and the leaves float at the top. But the principal area of interest here on the coastal plain is the evergreen shrub bogs, those wet areas that when the fire sweeps over, the rootstocks of the plants are preserved, and these bordering on to the savannas or grass sedge bogs provide the home environment for our insectivorous plants, the pitcher plants, the Venus flytrap, and all the others of these areas. Now, within the savannas, we hit the higher reaching areas where the sand is deeper, the ridges are higher, and we get into the sand hills. The longleaf pine area, one of our principal recreation areas in North Carolina. But this area farther inland, even 43 years ago, had been farmed. It had been logged, farmed, and a lot of it abandoned. So Dr. Wells described this area as the old field or the melting pot where the native plants and foreigners, the introduced species, mingled. This has taken the place of what was the deciduous forest formation, the Great Forest, which originally reached from an area along about equal to Raleigh, coming on through, up through Hickory, and into the mountains at a higher level. This area fades into what Dr. Wells called the Christmas tree forest, and in this he speaks of the high mountain flora. We have many peaks in North Carolina that reach this area, and climbing these peaks is the equivalent of going into Canada, the Canadian zone, with red spruce and Fraser's fir. So then, as we go from here into the film, The Natural Gardens of North Carolina, please bear in mind still that the narration, the words you are hearing, were taken exactly without editing from the text that Dr. Wells wrote some 43 years ago, and we are just going to try to show you over those words what we can find in the state today.
I shall only quote 2 paragraphs from my book. The first one starts with, North Carolina is unique among the eastern states for possessing within her borders the best examples of the most diverse vegetations, as these 2 criteria are judged in combination. Whoever the men were who designed the geographical biscuit cutter which sliced out the Old North State, they succeeded so well botanically that one might think of them as possessed with less political sense than vegetational acumen. In one East-West state unit, they succeeded in including the very finest examples of the southern Appalachian high mountain plant communities, which constitute the southern extension of the Canadian balsam fir forest, along with very extensive developments of typical southern low country plant associations, savannas, precocias, and swamps, which range northward from the Gulf. In a very real sense, North Carolina, though lying at right angles to the north-south longitudinal lines, unites Canada and Florida within a little over 2/3 of her length. On the same winter days when sub-zero weather and deep snows are holding the Christmas tree forest of balsams and spruces in a death-like silence, the palmetto trees of Smith Island are softly vocal with the summer-like whisperings of warm breezes fresh from the Gulf Stream. Now, I want to read a short paragraph on the next page here. And today, with about 10 million acres under cultivation out of the state's 31,200,000 acres, North Carolina is still an area of vast natural resources in a wild condition. And we use this phrase, natural resources, not only in the sense of monetary value, but in that of educational and aesthetic resources as well, the kind of value implied in our title, Natural Gardens.
The influence of the sea upon every shoreline is a very profound one, especially in the sorting action of moving water with its resulting accumulation of sand. We have one of the most pronounced effects of the ocean's never-ending activity. In strong contrast to a rock-bound shore like that of Maine, the geological factors in our coastal region have given us a practically unbroken shore of shifting sand. The seaside presents us with two of these soils which cannot become naturally populated with a vegetation. These areas are both characterized by shifting sand. In the one case, the ocean strand, the particles are moved by water, and in the other, the moving dune by wind. Plants have no chance where the soil is shifted about. With regard to the plant life by the sea, the dominant herbaceous plants are almost strictly confined to the smaller accumulations of sand, and strangely enough are never seen inland. The habitat is unusual, not only in its soil of pure sand, but also in certain other factors, such as the prevailing shoreward winds, the salt spray from the ocean, and the reflection of heat and light from the light-colored substratum. On the sand flat just above high tide, a seedling sea oats plant becomes established. When its leaves extend above the surface, a small windbreak is formed, with the immediate result that a tiny mound of sand accumulates behind and against the little leaf cluster. This additional bit of soil makes possible further growth of the grass, which improves the windbreak. More sand piles up, more grass grows, and in a few years, a dune many feet high is built. The underground stems and roots of the grass permeate the dune, making a veritable hidden net in which the sand is literally caught and held against the wind. Just as the herbaceous vegetation on the seafront is peculiar and distinctive, so the forest in North Carolina, when it comes down to the sea, changes its complexion. Every inlander who visits the beaches will be sure to hear about the remarkable dead live oaks of the vicinity if he doesn't see them. It is to be hoped, however, that he may not so much see the dead as the live ones, for the live oak is one of our most beautiful trees, with its small, hard, gray-green and evergreen leaves borne thickly over a low, rounded head. The trunk and branches are so twisted and bent that crooked as a live oak limb is a byword among certain coast folk. This character in a tree, however, gives it a high place artistically, and it may be truly said of our live oaks that no other trees can compete with them in the beauty of their rustic, scraggly trunks. North Carolina's coast is rich in salt marshes. If one has something of the taste of the naturalist or an artist, he will feel very sure that these vast saltwater grass and rush-covered areas have much wealth in them, whereas to the economist's mind they are but wasteland. Though they do not contain a large number of species like the dune vegetation, the few species which are found are of much interest because of their special adaptations to the habitat. The large extent of our salt marshes is, of course, related to the fact of the great development of sounds in North Carolina. In the inland marshes may be seen what nature can do with mud. Bogs in the rainy periods are black and soft enough, but in the drought seasons they may become sufficiently dry to be visited comfortably in ordinary footwear. Not so the marshes. These invariably occur where the high water table is persistent. To collect the attractive wildflowers of these areas will almost certainly call for bare feet, old shoes or boots, plus a lack of sensitiveness to mud. Marsh plants, if their home site is drained, soon die in soil that still has ample moisture for upland plants. Almost everywhere, the marsh vegetation passes over into the aquatic plant life of the deeper water. A convenient distinction between the two is that of growth above the water's surface. If the leaf-bearing stems or the leaves extend above the water, we regard such plants as belonging to the marsh community. Those whose leaves are floating or submersed will constitute the aquatic community. This distinction will, in the field, hold true to a very successful degree for the shoreward water or true marsh plants as distinguished from the pondward, deeper water aquatics. Every freshwater marsh will show more or less distinctly the phenomenon of zonation. Certain plants prefer the shallower borders while others are best adapted to the deeper water. In other situations, the character of the bottom soil exerts an influence. The phenomenon of marsh succession may in many places be observed in the lifetime of an individual. Due to filling in with resultant changing of water depth, the vegetation zones will shift until the wet soil sedges hold forth where once the deeper water arrowheads grew. The movement is almost invariably that of a progressive shallowing of the water. On a sinking coastline, the reverse changes would occur. In our swamp forest, we have, as in the case of the sandhills, a plant community, which is distinctly southern. In the shallow waters of ponds and river borders of the north, only shrubs and low willows are to be found. On low moist grounds, which are occasionally flooded for brief periods, such tall trees as the ash, elm, and maple may occur, but such areas are not comparable to the southern swamps, where in years of ordinary rainfall the water stands a few inches to 2 feet deep much of the time. 3 genera of trees, the gums, the cypresses, and the white cedars, are the dominants of our swamps. The relative abundance of these in any area gives the character of that particular forest. Very frequently, any one of the 3 may be seen in nearly pure stands, so that the locality may be definitely designated as a gum, cypress, or white cedar swamp. The swamp gum and the tupelo gum are the only trees of this genus adapted to the water-covered soil. They differ somewhat in choice of habitat, the tupelo gum tolerating the deepest water, while the swamp gum ranges into the shallower water and may occasionally be seen in the shrub bogs, even surviving as a relic in grass sedge bogs. The cypress has been divided into 2 species, though the differences between them are not great. Taxodion ascendens has the tiny leaves laid forward along the slender dwarf branches, while in Taxodion disticans they extend outward from the delicate twig. The trees thus have a different aspect, which may be noted at some distance. It's also believed that species differ in habitat, the first mentioned preferring sandy soil or subsoil, while the latter is more frequently found growing in silt or muck bottoms. When the cypresses are seen in virgin stand, they make a most impressive picture. Like the gums, they have swollen bases, which in the old and large trees of Taxodion disticans become prominently buttressed as well. The trunks or boles are long and slender, carrying at the top the great feathery crown. The larger trees reach a trunk diameter of 15 feet, and an occasional one is larger than that. Everyone, of course, is familiar with the green scum which appears on ponds and pools, and almost everyone knows that such masses are made up of microscopic plants very low in the order of nature, whose ancestors have always lived in the water. It's not so well recognized, however, that the flowering plants with which we are concerned, and which have made themselves at home with the fish, were, once upon a time, landforms. Like the seals and whales, which descended from the land mammals, our aquatic higher plants present a long history of progressive adaptation to submersion until, at the present time, many of them are able to grow and reproduce by seeds, though they are entirely under the water all of the time. Like the marsh plants, the aquatics find their greatest developments in lakes, ponds, and freshwater sounds and estuaries of the eastern part of the state. The early explorers and settlers in the flatlands of the lower 3 coastal plain terraces were much impressed by this broadleaf shrub vegetation which did not shed its leaves in winter. Scattered in smaller and larger masses, such a plant community was readily singled out, especially in the cold season, as a special sort of growth, and became known by two names. These names not only referred to the plants, but included as well the wet soil habitat, which has peculiarities and variations of its own. Both of these names, Poquoson and Bay, have come down to the present and are part and parcel of the verbal currency in eastern North Carolina. On the eastern flatlands, nature attains in our state her fullest and most varied expression of loveliness in the form of wildflowers. Only the spring display in the mountain meadows of the far west can rival the unusual wildflower show of our lower coastal plain grass sedge bogs. And fortunately, our bog beauties are not confined to the spring season at all, but during the summer and even in the late fall, they continue to make glorious the sunny savannas. Though not dominants by any means, the various species of pitcher plants, or trumpets, are so distinctive of savannas and so interesting in themselves that some account of them must be introduced here. The well-known habit of these specialized leaves, which contain free water, is that of drowning insects and by means of enzymes secreted into the water, digesting the bodies and absorbing the soluble nitrogenous material for food. The pitcher plant is unprotected from overflow in the rains with resultant loss of its meal. The other two, called trumpets, are never seen full of water because of the umbrella and the rain hat respectively. The water is secreted in their cavities. Young trumpet leaves, which have not yet opened their mouths in their growth, may be observed to contain half a cavity of water. The insects are attracted by odor, which gains in intensity as the dead bodies of the bugs increase in number. At the periphery, on the upper side of the trumpet hood, a series of nectar-bearing areas may be observed which are attractive to insects. In addition, the leaves themselves are colored bright yellow in Sarracenia flava, with more or less development of red along the veins, and this may be important in catching the attention of the small creatures of the air. The rain hat trumpet is a most amazing plant. If one holds one of these leaves in front of a light and peeks under the hood cover, he will see that the white patches on the back are very transparent. On those moist Poquoson borders, or flat semi-bog areas in the southeastern corner of North Carolina, where the soil does not become excessively wet or dry, is to be found the most unusual of unusual green things. This is the plant which Darwin called the most wonderful plant in the world, the Venus flytrap. And the modern botanist, who has learned much about the plant that Darwin did not know, is quick to agree with him. In this plant, the principle of the common steel trap is seen to have long antedated that of invention. Indeed, the flytrap long antedated man himself. Amid the white sands of our sandhill areas, the sun shines both up and down. Here one can acquire a fashionable tan with one's hat on. Here the rain disappears as fast as it falls, and the soil surface is dry within 30 minutes after the summer shower is over. Scattered here and there in patches, or even covering whole ridges, is the granulated sugar of the coarse, white, rain-washed sand reflecting light and heat like a mirror. Sterility from leaching, heat from reflection of the sun's rays, and very low soil water in the long droughts and terrible fires all conspire to make the sandhills very different and unique localities for plants, animals, and men. The type community of the deep, coarse sand may readily be recognized by the presence on it of two trees, and only two, the longleaf pine and the forked-leaved turkey oak. If any other trees are present, the field student will know immediately that some condition has changed, resulting in improvement of the soil water condition. Among the few smaller plants which deserve special mention, none is more common or more remarkable than the wiregrass. This is the very common tussock grass, with slender wire-like leaves, which one encounters everywhere in the coarse sand country. It not only grows on the hilltops, but down on the slopes as well, until in thick stand it makes contact with the shrub bogs of the wet soils on the lower slopes and bottoms. Wiregrass may everywhere be used as the indicator of medium to coarse sand soils in our coastal plain. Wherever the sand runs toward the finer types, it's never found. Omitting the very coarse, pure white sand ridges previously discussed, We may say that wiregrass and sandhills are like Siamese twins, never seen apart. A volume could be written about the longleaf pine. There are a few facts, however, which everyone should know concerning this, the noblest tree of its group. Mature cones are not produced every season, seed years being from 3 to 7 years apart. The seedling pines spend the first 4 or 5 years building a taproot, the stem not rising above the ground surface. The cluster of leaves during this stage resemble a coarse wiregrass. Fire will sweep over them, destroying the leaves, but the stem bud will come through unscathed. Even the young trees, because of rapid growth and early appearance of thick bark, will resist fire most remarkably. This pine is the king of fire resistors among the trees. However, especially heavy fires under high wind will kill many of them. The vicious circle of the 3 elements, sand, plant tinder, and fire, is almost impossible to break. Ecological theory holds that soils are constantly improving in nutrient and water retaining capacity. The accumulation of leaf litter alone would do much in those directions. With an improving soil, the plants of higher water content, and therefore of higher fire resistance, would tend to come in, and our sandy areas would be eventually forested by a tall, broadleaf forest. But the soil building process is entirely too slow. The inevitable fire turns the valuable litter into smoke, clears away the wiregrass tussocks, and sets back the shade-making shrub oaks. When all this has happened, the habitat is hotter and drier than ever so, that only inflammable plants may enter, and they encourage fire. And so the vicious trio of sand, vegetational tinder, and fire will, for many years to come, hold their reign in spite of all that man can do about it. The regenerative powers of organisms constitute one of life's most important aspects. Only living things can heal their wounds. The broken or maladjusted machine is utterly helpless and completely dependent on outside forces for its repair, but not so is life. It is a most curious and interesting fact that this restorative activity of plant life extends far beyond maintaining the individual and its parts into the realm of plants in the mass. By this statement we mean that if the original society of plants in an area is destroyed, a wound made in the primeval forest cover, nature promptly proceeds to heal that wound, and in time the affected area will be just as it was. Though a scar is left after a gashed finger, the healed forest will show no evidence of the injury it suffered, so perfect will be the work of restoration. Naturally, years instead of days are involved, but immediately following the injury or destruction of any original native vegetation, the advance guard of certain species begins to reclaim the bare area and initiates a series of plant communities which follow one another until at last the original plants re-enter and the green epidermis of the earth is fully restored. On both the moist and dry fields, all these varied species of the second stage tend to give way to one genus of grasses, the omnipresent broom sedges. Once present, the broom sedges spread rapidly in moist soil, and by the end of the 5th year, broom sedge tussocks will be thick over the area with few weeds of any other kind left to compete with it. Peeping above the surface of the broom sedge a year or 2 later will be the green tassels of the loblolly pine, which will here almost certainly come up in a thick stand, and when they get above the broom sedge, the latter will thin out rapidly. The pines will go on growing for many years in complete charge of the one-time cornfield, but they in time must go to the way of their predecessors, for the oak-hickory forest will come right up in its midst, shading and killing the lower branches, first and finally catching up with the smaller trees, which die out in large numbers. It may be 50 or 80 years more, but what are decades in the lives of plant communities which are thousands of years old? The North Carolinian of today who speeds across the open country in his fast car can hardly imagine what his state was like when the original forest covered it. At the time Columbus was becoming acquainted with America's shoreline, the plants were in almost complete domination of this country. The Indians were not present in sufficient numbers, nor did they have adequate tools to interfere seriously with the processes going on in the leafy kingdom. One exception must be noted in passing. They did fire the woods occasionally, But in spite of this, over vast areas stretched the unbroken forest. On the trails through it, one could travel for days without a good view of the sun, and at night the constellations could seldom be seen because of the interfering canopy of high verdure. The streams, thanks to the omnipresent forest and its sponge-like floor, were of clear water most of the time, and their flow did not fluctuate widely as at the present. Animal life was abundant in all regions, the larger species ranging throughout the state. In its pristine condition, the entire eastern United States was a naturalist's paradise, and within this vast virgin wilderness, the maximum attainment in size and kinds of trees was in the southern Appalachian Mountains. The lower mountains, or those which one first meets upon approaching the highland district from the Piedmont, carry a forest of somewhat different composition than the high mountains beyond. These lower mountains are carved in the eastern edge of the Asheville Plateau and may be roughly included between the altitudes of 1,500 and 3,000 feet. On these slopes formerly grew magnificent forest of white, chestnut, black, northern red, and shingle oak, together with a wide array of other large trees such as the butternut, shellbark hickory, and chestnut. At the higher altitudes in these mountains, excellent stands of the very beautiful white pine occur. In the higher mountains above 3,000 feet and ranging up to 5,000 and in places to 5,500 feet, we find the great oak chestnut forest. The chestnut, formerly the dominant tree, is now disappearing under the insidious attack of a fungus parasite, but its place will be rapidly taken by the oaks and other trees. The virtual elimination of a dominant tree species such as the chestnut is a major event in the plant world, and the problem of the adjustment of the other trees and filling in the gaps made by the dead chestnuts is a matter of the greatest interest to foresters. In any event, in the near future, the ecologist and forester will speak of the higher mountain oak forest. One of the most beautiful shrubs in the world, and perhaps the uncontested perennial blue ribbon winner of North Carolina, is the flame azalea of the mountain woods. When Linnaeus gave it the name lutea, meaning yellow, he told only a fraction of the color story, for the showy corollas of this remarkable shrub vary widely throughout the range of the warm colors, only stopping where blue comes in to make the reds over into purple. All the possible color tones lying between bright yellows through orange to deepest reds are in the repertory of this plant. The variation appears to be due to both hereditary factors and to the age of the flowers. No more glorious scene in nature may be had than that of dark mountain woods illuminated by the torch-like flowers of the flame azalea. It's little wonder that Michaud named the species calendulacea. Our Canadian friends may not recognize it, but all of Canada is by no means beyond the northern boundary of the United States. Of course, we're speaking climatically, and we may do so because of the rule that high altitude and latitude give us similar climates. Whether we go up or go north, it just gets cold in either case. Thus, along the entire range of our eastern mountains, here and there the summits become high enough to be sufficiently cold to suppress the oaks and other broadleaf trees. This check upon the great forest makes possible the advent of the same kind of Canadian forest with which is found north of the deciduous tree region. And this forest, romantically enough, is made up of genuine Christmas trees. In Europe, for centuries, the balsam firs and spruces have been used at Yuletide. No other trees are somehow equal to these for displaying the candles or, in the modern period, the electric-colored lights. The vast stretches of fir forest in Canada grow at low altitudes. On the Newfoundland coast, the trees come down to the sea. But in North Carolina, the same climatic conditions are not met until an altitude of 5,500 feet or greater is reached. Since the state has 40 peaks over 6,000 feet, it is readily seen why by far the largest areas of boreal forest in the southern Appalachians are included within the boundaries of North Carolina. The spruce trees are more frequent at the lower altitudes within the boreal forest, so that when entering the mountain peak forest from any side, the spruces will at first be very abundant, but give way to the dominance of the balsam at the higher altitudes, where in many peaks the stand is a practically pure one. These two Christmas trees constitute the body of the cold-loving forest. All other woody plants play a very minor role in this community. The mountain ash, a small tree with its pinnate leaves and its flat-topped cluster of bright red little apples, is certainly to be encountered along with the shrub known as the hobblebush. The high mountain rhododendron is scattered widely in the more open forests. This shrub, however, expresses itself best in the open. No plant communities in the state have been more puzzling to the ecologist than those that come under the designation of mountain balds. These are the high mountain areas which are treeless, the surface now being covered by either an herbaceous or a shrub vegetation, or these more or less mixed. Since the forest is found much higher, being present on the two highest mountains, Mitchell and Klingman's Dome, we may be sure that the balds are not to be compared with the low mountain tundra of western mountains, a grass and shrub vegetation found only above the timberline. The eastern mountain balds have a very different story behind them, but as we have already indicated, that story is far from being fully known. All sorts of theories have been imagined to account for these forest-free areas. One student believed that they were all so located that ice storms were more frequent in their respective sites, with consequent continual breaking of tree limbs in winter, thus making it impossible for the trees to compete with the smaller vegetation. Soil acidity, wind, fire, parasites, almost every important ecological factor has been called upon to contribute its share in explaining how a bald came into existence and how it's maintained. It's astonishing for the inexperienced in ascending the mountains to change forests within half a mile, or on steep slopes the distance may be even less. From certain lookout points, the observer can look over the treetops at the high altitudes and see the transition region where the deciduous trees become dwarfed and disappear with the accompanying appearance and increase of the balsams and spruces. It's difficult to make oneself believe that in that short distance which leads from one pure forest type to an entirely different one, a complete change of climate occurs. This change, insofar as the vegetation is concerned, is greater than the difference between the climate of the mountain slopes and that of the coastal plain. The most significant change among the number of climatic factors present is the change in temperature. So sudden and so severe is the onset of freezing temperatures in both the fall and spring that the broadleaf trees are not able to stand such extreme changes, with the result that winter killing and growth repression are so great that these trees become insignificant as competing units of the vegetation. However, without attempting here to go far into technicalities, we may be very certain that the hardiest native plants of our state are naturally those which grow at the highest altitudes, where temperatures of 25 and 30 degrees below zero are not uncommon, and where the growing season is confined to a little over 3 months of the year. Not only the trees, but numerous shrubs and many herbs are to be included in this class of hardiest plants. On certain high summits, which are exposed to all the high desiccating winds, the fir trees give evidence of repression and show a one-sided growth. The rhododendron becomes very compact. If our mountains were high enough, as may be observed in the western ranges, an altitude would be reached at which the climate would be too severe for even the balsams and the spruces. They fall short of that elevation by a few thousand feet.
Where the mountains roll green and stretch high enough to the sky, where the wildflowers spring and the birds never quit and the waters go laughing by. I met a man there who showed